This is something that I never thought would happen to me. A couple months ago, I was sitting at my desk. I had just arrived at work, and somebody had asked me a question. And the response to that question was something super basic, something along the lines of, oh, yeah, we just need to put it over there, something like that. And for the life of me, it took me like 10 whole seconds to respond to this person. And they gave me like a kind of concerned look because I had forgotten how to say it in English temporarily. My brain was just thinking in Vietnamese for the past couple hours, so there was friction. It had took me a little while to remember how to say such a simple concept in English. And I think that kind of problem there is every language learner's dream, right? We all want to have this problem where we are such in a flow of thinking in our target language that switching to English becomes difficult. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to do this and do it even faster than I was able to do it, okay? So in order to actually think in your target language without trying and to have this kind of naturally happen, there's a couple of core concepts that you need to keep in mind that are universally true. The first of these core concepts is extremely important, and it is that your brain optimizes for efficiency all the time. Okay, your brain is an extremely efficient machine. It does not want to waste any energy unnecessarily. Okay, and so your brain is not just going to start randomly thinking in Vietnamese unless in that moment, thinking in Vietnamese is more convenient than thinking in English. Okay. So if you keep this in mind, you can kind of guide yourself towards the types of actions and the types of things that you need to do in order to get to this point. Okay. So with that being said, if you do not have a foundation of input in your target language, then thinking in your target language without trying is not possible. Okay. And actually, if you don't have that level of input foundation, then actively trying to think in your target language is probably not a productive thing to be doing in the first place. It might actually be counterproductive. Okay. Because when you think about it, when you're thinking in your target language, you're using the grammar structures and the vocabulary that you already know, okay? You're not using new structures that you don't yet know, if that makes sense, okay? And so if you make grammar mistakes in your head, you can actually fossilize these mistakes and then it can mess up your output in the future. Okay, so you need to be careful when you're doing this. I would say that unless you have about, the most common 1000 words down and a couple hundred hours of listening under your belt, then you shouldn't be trying to do this. And you shouldn't even be worried about this, right? It's not the type of thing where if you're not thinking in your target language after a couple months, then you're behind. It's not like that at all, okay? It took me 2 years of studying Vietnamese before I started naturally thinking in Vietnamese without trying, okay? So this stuff takes some time and it's not something that you should rush towards, right? But there are a lot of benefits to thinking in your target language, which I'll get to later. And if you want to get those benefits and you're already at the point where you can start to think in your target language, you just want to automate it, then this is when you're really going to want to start implementing the things that I'm telling you here. Another core concept that you're going to want to keep in mind is that to completely switch the language that you're currently thinking in takes effort for your brain. And as I mentioned earlier, your brain doesn't want to do things unnecessarily that take effort, right? And so this works in both ways. So if you're thinking, let's just say in Vietnamese, to switch back to English takes effort, as my story kind of demonstrated, right? But the other way around is also the case. And so if you're thinking in English, which you probably are, it's going to take a lot of effort to make that switch, right? And so a lot of people have this misconception that from the get go, once you kind of get used to the language, you're going to be able to flow in and out of it, just like how bilinguals do, right? And that is something that takes years, okay? Like most bilinguals who are able to effortlessly flow in and out of native language and English and things like that have reached the point where they've spent like 10 plus years with these languages, right? So for you, that's not going to be the case, okay? And this is another reason why your output ability can often seem worse than it should be. Like, for example, if I'm going with a friend to a Vietnamese restaurant and me and my friend are speaking in English, and then the waiter comes up to me, my brain now has to switch from English to Vietnamese, which is a very difficult thing. And so oftentimes what's happening is that my brain is in English mode, but I'm actually speaking Vietnamese, which makes my output substantially worse. And whereas if somebody who natively speaks Vietnamese, who's lived in America their whole life, they can just easily switch back and forth like it's no problem. So the key takeaway for this section of the video is that your brain is going to do whatever is the most convenient in the moment. To switch languages takes a lot of effort, so your brain is not going to want to fully make that switch immediately. And this is something that you're going to get better at over time. Okay. Now, how do you actually set your brain to make this switch and eventually automate it to be effortless very quickly? So, what you're going to want to do in order to set your brain is put yourself in a state where you are only hearing the target language and there is zero English, right? So, you're not thinking English at all and you're not speaking English at all, obviously, right? And so, what you're going to want to do is focus on listening, not reading. The reason why is that oftentimes when you read, it's easier to stop because you can stop whenever you want when you're reading, right? And then think and have English thoughts about the things that you're reading, right? But whereas where you're listening, you're not going to have those thoughts. You can just really focus on what you're listening. And if you're listening really intently and really carefully, you're going to have zero thoughts coming into your brain. You're only going to be listening, right? And so listening is super crucial. You're probably going to be wanting to look up words during this time while you're listening. And so, in order to look up words without seeing English, because when you look at the definition, you have to read and understand the definition in English, which kind of breaks your flow. What you're going to want to do is use a simplified monolingual definition. I have a guide and a whole video related to this topic using AI in the description below if you want to check this out after this video. But basically, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tell ChatGPT to define words for you using the most common 500 words in your target language, right? So you can understand definitions in your target language. So you're basically watching a show in the target language, literally locking in only thinking of your target language. When you see a word you don't know, you look it up in ChatGPT and it gives you the definition in your target language. And you should even type like, what does this word mean in your target language, right? So there's literally zero English. And you can set your ChatGPT language to your target language as well. So even when it says like, oh, I'm thinking about whatever, it says it in your target language, okay? So this is kind of extreme, but it does work. And I find that when I'm in those types of moments, I end up thinking in my target language within 20 minutes, right? Whereas normally when I'm going back and forth with English definitions and things like that, it takes me a little bit longer to get into the flow, right? And it's all about the quantity, like the percentage ratio of how much target language to English that you're getting. If you're getting like 60% Vietnamese, 40% English, then it's going to take your brain a while to make that transition and realize, okay, I should probably think in Vietnamese now because the majority of the conversation that's happening is in Vietnamese. Whereas if you're going 100% target language, then your brain makes that switch much faster, if that makes sense, right? Another thing that you can do is mimic phrases that stand out during your immersion. And what I mean by that is if you haven't been learning languages for a minute, it's this might seem a little bit like it doesn't make sense, but let me try to explain this the best I can. Sometimes when you're watching a show, a character will say something and it will kind of just stick in your brain and you'll almost like think it right after they say it. Like they'll say something like I remember when I was first starting to get immersion in Vietnamese, I would hear people say like không thể nào, which means like, oh, I can't do that, no way, right? Something like that. And anytime they said that, I would want it would kind of like almost like echo in the back of my mind when I would heard that phrase. It just kind of stuck with me. And so sometimes when they said it, I would just repeat it right after them. The character would say, không thể nào được. And I'd be like, không thể nào. And then that kind of echo and reverberation process going on in the back of my brain. This is all just like headcanon at this point. I'm just making theories up in bro science, but I think that probably babies have something similar to where when a human speaks to them, when human is crazy, human, when an adult speaks to them, they'll hear this kind of like reverberation in their brain, this kind of echo of the adult speech, and they'll have the urge to try to mimic that, right? It seems like a very natural process. And if you haven't been studying languages or whatever, you probably think I'm crazy and you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I bet a lot of you guys know the feeling that I'm talking about when you hear something in your target language and you have this urge to just repeat after it, right? And kind of leaning into that urge and actually doing it, I think really, really helps with this because you start to really internalize key structures that kind of form the building blocks of your thoughts in the future. And for me at first, I would ignore this like desire to like repeat after the phrase because I just thought I should stay silent and it was kind of weird. But then it's once I started thinking about it, it's not actually that weird. I think it's a good thing to do. So try doing that. Additionally, this leads me to the next point of like if you're not ever speaking, like you're only just consuming, it's going to be very difficult for you to think because thinking is basically speaking but without using your voice. You're speaking in your head, right? So if you don't if your brain is not accustomed to speaking your target language, you're not going to think in it, right? And so this is why a lot of the input only crowd often doesn't get like thoughts in their target language. So what you're going to want to do is I'd recommend having a tutor or maybe like just a native speaker friend, but probably a tutor is best for this. And in order to use this tutor to optimize your thinking process, what you're going to want to do is tell them about your day in the target language. This is super crucial because most of your thoughts are about what's happening in the current moment. So if you're constantly getting used to talking about your daily life, then when you inevitably have thoughts about your daily life, you'll be able to articulate those thoughts concisely and well in your target language. And with a tutor is super important because they can correct you whenever you say something wrong or whatever that may be. Or if you don't know how to say something, they can tell you how to say it in a very natural way, right? Tell them not only about what you did that day, but also about what you plan to do. Because often when you're thinking about what you have just done and what you're going to do. And oftentimes those are two different skills to speak about those two different things. And even tell your tutor about the types of thoughts that you usually have. Tell them like, oh, usually I think about this. It might seem unnatural, but you can, if you have like just an ounce of finesse, you can kind of work this into like a natural tutoring session, right? And even just tell your tutor like, oh, I really want to focus on daily life, my daily thoughts and things like that. And most often than not, they're going to be happy about that because that's actually a very productive thing to be doing with a tutoring session, right? And the final strategy, I wanted to mention this last. This is to manually think, right? And the reason why I'm mentioning this last is because we want to automate this process. So by making yourself manually think in your target language, it's kind of like getting the ball rolling. Like when you first push something, like when you're going to like push an object, and at first for like the first 1 second of pushing it, you have to overcome the static friction of that object. And then once you actually start pushing it and you get the ball rolling, it's super easy. Probably for maybe like the first week of implementing all these strategies that I told you, you're going to have to start manually thinking in your head. It's not just going to happen because your brain's not used to it, right? So manually think in your head for like a week, especially if you're doing those tutoring sessions, it'll be really good to do this. And then after that, as long as you're getting input in the way that I just described earlier, it should just start to naturally happen, right? Which is a really cool thing. And I honestly really want you guys to be able to experience this. The reason why is because the biggest benefit of thinking in your target language is something I call gap identification. And what this is that when you're thinking in your target language, you're going to have 1 second where you just switch to English to say something, and then you immediately go back to thinking in your target language. I mentioned before that there's a lot of like friction, and it's very difficult for your brain to like fully switch to a different language. But this is not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is like, let's just say you say I want to eat in your target language, and then you say pineapple in English because you don't know the word for pineapple in your target language, and then you immediately go back to thinking in your target language. This is a gap in your knowledge that you have just identified. And this is why I think thinking in your target language is so helpful. It's not because like there's some magic thing that goes on when you do that. It's because of the gap identification, right? And there's so many times when I'm thinking in my target language and I switch to English and I immediately switch back, and then I look up that structure later. And when you look up something that you identified in your thoughts, for some reason you just remember it so much better because it's so personal to you and it's so practical. It's something that's probably applicable in your daily life, right? So that's super important. That's going to supercharge your input. That's going to supercharge your lookups. It's going to be very, very helpful for identifying gaps in knowledge. And I just want to also put a disclaimer here. Just because you switch to English to express something doesn't necessarily mean it's a gap in knowledge. Oftentimes, certain languages express certain concepts a lot better than other languages, and certain languages have words and constructs that don't even exist in another language. So, if you switch to English for something and then upon reflection you realize that that concept is just simply better expressed in English, then don't even worry about it. That's just part of the natural process of how you're gonna flow, right? This is why like a lot of bilinguals will just switch to English for 2 words or a sentence and then go back to speaking in their native language because certain concepts just roll off better in other languages. And so when you mix with these groups, you'll naturally develop this sort of inclination to use this switch to English at the same times as they do and things like that. And that's how you really like integrate and sound more native like in a what do you say, like in like a paradoxical way you end up sounding more native like by using English in certain situations. It's pretty funny, but yeah, that's about it. Thank you for listening.